All right, everyone. Shall we get started? Great. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. This is the generative AI session for supply chains. My name is Anna Urshova, and I am part of the supply chain product team. And Justin, who's here with me as well, is also part of the supply chain product team at C3. So it's been just over a year since ChatGPT was launched. And for many people, this was probably the first time that they were really exposed to sort of this new buzzword of generative AI. Since then, those of you who were Transform a year ago, we officially launched C3 Generative AI at that time. And since then, everybody I think by now has played with ChatGPT. Everybody has kind of tried to learn how to differentiate deepfakes from the real images on the internet, right? And I assume all of you guys here are interested in using generative AI for your business. Some of you, your CEO may have given you a directive to figure out how to use it, and maybe some of you are the CEO who's trying to figure out how to use it. We do know there's a huge interest in it. The truth is nobody really knows how to use it and how to use it well to generate business value. And that's what we're here to talk about. What we're going to do today is I'm going to take you guys through some of our thinking about generative AI and supply chain, and then Justin will do some demos. Generative AI is a very powerful tool. We all know this, right? But if you go, on the internet and search what can I use generative AI for, and even if you use ChatGPT that, which I actually tried doing it this morning, it will tell you that it's great for certain things. Forecasting, optimization, what-if analysis or scenario planning, predictive modeling, all of that. In reality, all of these problems are not great. Generative AI is actually uniquely suited for a variety of functionalities, but it's a pretty limited scope of them, right? If you have a forecasting challenge, use regular AI. If you have an optimization challenge, use regular AI. But if you want to do anything with natural language interactions, generating insights on your existing data, having an explainability use case, or just summarizing information, summarizing data, that's where generative AI really shines. And for supply chain, we've identified a couple use cases that we're working on. Some of you in the room, I think we're actually working on these use cases with. Some of you might be new to this. So the very first use case is a knowledge assistant. So you have the body of the data, and I'll explain this also in a little bit of a greater detail in a couple slides. But you have this body of your data, and you want to figure out, you want to query the data. A very classic example for many of you in manufacturing is you have these manufacturing plants that have machines that need to be maintained. And the people who've been maintaining them for decades are retiring, right? And the information may just be kind of in their head. So how do you actually help the new people who are coming in to onboard all of these problems and query the body of data that you have in your business? Right, so this is a knowledge assistance use case. It's very classic, sort of classic generative AI. Of course, it's usable not just for supply chain, but this is one of the use cases here. Automatic insight generation. Many of you guys, I've been talking to many of you, when you have 100,000 SKUs, your businesses, some people have 5,000 SKUs, some people have 400,000 SKUs. This is a lot of data. It's a lot of patterns, a lot of orders to kind of parse through. So for us, generative AI is very helpful for identifying these unapparent patterns in the data. So something that you may not necessarily have your analyst, do a Power BI report on, but generative AI can actually process all this data and then query it and kind of highlight what's unapparent. We also have a scenario modeling use case. And I have just said in the previous slide that scenario modeling, what-if analysis is not the best Gen AI use case. And this is because you actually need an actual scenario modeling capability to sit on top of your data first. But once you have it, generative AI actually makes for a pretty good co-pilot. So you can actually query this scenario modeling. So instead of configure multiple scenarios, you can kind of interact with it in a natural language way. It's very efficient, very fast, but once again, you do need to have that capability first. And then you have the evidence package support. So at least here in C3, every AI forecast we create is backed by an evidence package, right? So we explain what is driving your forecast, what are the drivers, and you can query that evidence package using generative AI. And Justin will actually show a brief demo for how we use this for demand forecasting. I think most of you guys know by now, we have a supply chain suite. So we have 5 products that are all kind of tied together or can be deployed separately. And we've been working on using generative AI for all of them. But something that I really need to highlight is that generative AI will deliver the most value when it's combined with traditional AI, right? And this is your scenario modeling use case once again. If you actually have a scenario modeling AI capability, generative AI is a great intelligence layer on top of that. But if you don't have it, generative AI is not going to be helpful for that. So the way we think about it is, for us, we always start with unifying the data and modeling it into a supply chain digital twin. Then we deploy AI use cases on top of it. And then on top of it, to get even more value, we deploy generative AI. We do have standalone generative AI use cases. So this would be kind of a knowledge assistant use case that I've mentioned. But overall, you really want to start with kind of regular AI before you start looking for that additional layer of information. Tom talked about it this morning, right? But we can't highlight enough that it's critical to do generative AI safely. I spoke to a prospective customer, a couple of months ago, and they're in financial services, and they said, well, we tried generative AI, we leaked all of our information to ChatGPT, and we're now banned from doing anything with generative AI. So we're very strict with our security and safety protocol. I really don't think I need to repeat everything Tom was saying, but just to highlight, everything is secure. You get your own LLM, and you also have no hallucinations, right? So we have special retrieval structures that allow us to avoid this hallucination problem. Because hallucinations are fun when you're playing with ChatGPT, but they're not that fun when you're the fate of your business or how you plan your demand or how you're risking your supply chain depends on it. So let's also talk about where generative AI traditionally is not great. Math. Right? If you ask ChatGPT to do math, it's gotten better over time. It's not perfect, even for the most basic things, right? Like the things that you should be able kind of to do in your head, like summation, addition, multiplication. So traditionally, generative AI for business cases started with unstructured data. Unstructured data is, text, your PDF files, training manuals, maintenance manuals, reports, emails. So everything that is not in a database, in a table, in an Express spreadsheet. Those things will be structured data. So traditionally, generative AI is great with unstructured data, not that great with structured data. When you choose a generative AI solution, it's important to choose one that works for both. So for us, we actually have a really high accuracy of responses on structured data as well. It's 85% plus. It's improving consistently. By now, this actually may be a little higher now. But what is also important is to have a solution that will actually tell you when it doesn't have an answer, it doesn't have an accurate answer, right? So this is the hallucination problem again. You want generative AI to not just make something up. You want it actually to say, I don't know. And that's something that we've invested a lot of time and effort in. So let's just walk through a very simple use case before we switch to some demos. So let's say we have the supply chain analyst, and she's trying to figure out where stockouts are going to be. Many of you probably have such analysts, or what the risks of stockouts, right? So many of you probably have such analysts working for you, and have posed just the exact same question. So traditionally, the way this is done is, there are many different databases. You have to query them. You have to have Power BI reports. So you write some SQL. You have to bring all the data together. And this may take quite a while. And, You might even go to a different department and ask them where to look for the data, and eventually you'll get there, but maybe at that point it might be even too late, or it's just frustrating and inefficient. So the way that generative AI works, like I said, it's great as an intelligence layer, right? So this is that use case of a knowledge assistant where it brings together all this data. So instead of having one person go and try to figure out where the information lives, is it accurate, how do I bring it together, how do I query it, you will actually have the one person who can just go to the interface, ask a question directly, say, where's my risk of stockouts in the next week, and get that answer. This is a really, really great generative AI use case, right? That's where it excels. It brings together the structured data, it brings together unstructured data, it processes it, and then it shares it with you in a human-readable format, right? Which is also important because you might want to take a screenshot of it and send it to your executives. And some of the questions that I know we've tested at C3 are, what are the most critical order risks this week? What promotions should I run next week? Are there any new demand drivers that I need? And Justin will show a few more in his demo as well. The other very important part of generative AI is having access control. So imagine that you have maybe you are a federal contractor and you need to really kind of safeguard that data, or in general, you may be making something that, you may have portions of your supply chain data that are not, that you don't want everyone to know about, let's say. You're just trying to protect your data. So it's very important to make sure that when this hypothetical analyst is submitting the query, there's actually an access control model in place that protects that data, so that the analyst can still get access to the data that they can access, but then not get access to the data that they shouldn't be accessing. I know that for us, this is something that we do natively. It's a platform capability. But we always recommend that this is a very, very critical piece of our generative AI offering that we recommend our customers to look for. So let's just summarize before we move on to demos. So where is generative AI useful for supply chain applications? You really want to use it as an insights layer, an intelligence layer. It's great for knowledge assistant use cases, so collecting all structured data and unstructured data in your organization and querying it. It's great for generating unapparent insights, so processing huge volumes of data and identifying interesting patterns. It can help with scenario modeling, provided you already have an AI solution in place for this. And it can help you with explainability, and once again, Justin will help demonstrate that as well. Before we move on to demonstrations, are there any questions? No questions at all. Okay. Please.
Maybe just one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What you said about insight generation. Do we actually see a real use case right now where using Gen AI to generate insight, or is it more about describing or summarize the trend, and then the human in the loop to actually do the insight generation?
Good question. So in terms of identifying kind of interesting patterns, identifying interesting insights, that is a very valid use case that we've been working on. We actually have patented something like this. So imagine the idea of a daily brief. So you're an executive or just a supply chain specialist, and there's a brief that lands in your inbox every day or maybe every week, depending on how often you're willing to read it, that explains, hey, here are some interesting things that are happening in your space that you may not be noticing otherwise. So yes, this is a very, very valid use case, and it's definitely something we've been working on.
I'll also add into that, imagine if you were in a supply chain and you showed up each morning, and this is that summarization, and you got a list of, these are the top 5 fires you need to put out today.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're very focused, like, hey, this is what I need to work on. Being able to aggregate that in, is it a demand problem? Is it an inventory problem? Is it a risk problem from this? Is it a production issue? Being able to summarize those and put it in, that's the kind of insights that I think we're focusing on at this point.
Please.
You showed the slide earlier, and I might not get these numbers right, but I think you showed 90% accuracy.
Yeah.
Unstructured data, 85% was structured. So one, accuracy doesn't seem very good in making decisions, but secondly, that really seemed counterintuitive to me. I would have thought that structured data would lead to a lot more accuracy than unstructured.
Yeah, and it's interesting because intuitively as humans, for us, many of us who started our careers, using something like Excel or SQL, right? You're used to just going to create a pivot table and get an answer, right? It's a lot easier to do than to read 20 emails and try to get the summary from that, right? Yeah, that's not how large language models work, actually. So large language models are notoriously bad with structured data, with math. The accuracy we got on math was 50%, which is terrifying. So for us, actually, to get to that level in structured data, it took us a while and a lot of effort, right? And you can actually try this with ChatGPT. It's gotten better with math, but ask it some mathematical problems and see what you get. It's not going to be great. It's great at writing poetry. I don't know how useful that is for supply chain, but historically it has been great with unstructured data. Now, in terms of the accuracy level, you have to remember it's not like a demand forecast where you got 100 responses and 90 were accurate. It's more that you got 100 responses, you asked 100 questions, and 90 had an answer that we knew was accurate. In the other 10, it will tell you, I don't have an answer. And this is a very kind of academic number. For our customers, when we do projects, we usually ask specifically, what questions are you more likely to ask, right? So let's say for demand forecasting, we have a demo, and a hypothetical analyst typically asks the same 10 questions over and over again, or even the same 100 questions. So we'll make sure that those are answerable and are answerable accurately. But these solutions, they're not perfect. This is a very good benchmark. Frankly speaking, I can't speak for every Gen AI company out there, but this is a differentiator for us. I don't think many companies or many people really understand how much of a challenge this is.
So, David, I'll also add in the math problem is a real thing, but imagine your data and how it's structured. If you're in SAP and you see these are my T codes, well, what does that T code really mean? And so how do you translate that? Or your IT department has put these headers on the columns for all your data sets in their database. Well, they don't really mean anything. They mean something to the IT professional, and then you have to have a translator. And so a lot of the information to go make structured data more available within ChatGPT or within generative AI is the ability to say, hey, I want to ask a question, and I want to see purchase orders. Well, now I have to go find where that data is labeled then purchase orders, because your column headers are not always called purchase orders. And so it's helping to do that translation.
Oh, so it's labeled purchase orders, but it's misspelled.
There's that too.
So help me understand the 90% accuracy then. The way I understood you explain it was if you ask it 100 questions, it can give a response on 90.
Yes, if we really test it or pressure test it with a huge volume of all hypothetical questions. In real life, if we were to do this for a customer, we would make sure that the top 100 you're going to ask are all answerable.
Understand. How do you measure the accuracy of the answers?
Manually. So
you validate the model, you get a 99 out of 100 manual validation, so you call it 99% accurate. But the questions evolve over time. I'm just wondering, how do we make sure that it stays accurate? Is there a process for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So there's several kind of safeguards. Well, one is we're consistently improving our model and consistently testing them. So let's say that we saw there is a pattern. Let's say our data science team says that there's a pattern where a specific question is not getting answered correctly. We'll work to rectify that. In our apps, we actually have a very simple thumbs up or thumbs down process, and you'll see it in one of the demos. You can actually say, no, this is not right. And as soon as we get that signal, we'll start testing that as well. So there's a very direct.
From the users.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we have a very direct intervention mechanism.
Is that mandatory in terms of feedback to the users?
No, you don't have to use it. But it's, and interestingly, it's a little bit like Yelp reviews, right? They're usually 1 star or 5 stars. And with these things, people are very good at thumbing things down. If it's great, nobody really thumbs it up. But all we need is 1 thumbs down review to start reviewing it. Go ahead.
But didn't Tom present this morning showing that you have drill down to the source of the answer of the data from your data? So that's how you can validate it.
Yeah, no, that's how we manually validate it. So for instance, you have a corpus of text, and we're saying, okay, so answer, for a legal use case, what were the precedents for this type of legal use case? Somebody will literally manually check that this works, right? That you can trace it to a specific paragraph. So there's actually multiple things you're tracing. One is that you're linking to the correct paragraph. So if I read the paragraph that I'm linking to, and you'll see this in Justin's demo, there is an actual link. And the second piece is that all of the correct paragraphs were found by the generative AI.
Which is a hard thing to check.
Indeed. I don't disagree. It's actually harder. It's easier to check structured data, right? Of course, the math is usually correct or not correct. Any other questions? Go ahead.
So how nuanced can you get with the access control layers? I imagine kind of in like a classified environment, like, with different like classification layers and data that's available. Like, is it at the individual level? Is it at a group level? Like, especially with all the different kinds of information?
So it depends, is the answer. And for classified environments, everything will also be on-prem, which is another thing we do. For some of our financial services customers, we have the same solution. We have row-level security and page-level security. Row-level security is what you need, right? So each piece of information is tagged with top secret, classified, whatever else. And then this is a very simple generalization of this, right? But each individual, which level they should have access to. So what's interesting, right, if I have a high-ranking person with a lot of clearance, they may get a very different answer from someone who is, an analyst. Both of them will get correct answers within their access levels.
I'll also say within a supply chain, when you think about who are your insider traders in your companies, and not everyone has access to the profitability of different things.
Exactly.
You might be able to see sales, and it's, hey, this customer ordered this quantity of this product. That's okay, but they're not going to see how much profit am I making off of that. And so those are the kind of data sets that you start to say, all right, you have access to this, but you don't have access to this. And so how do you assign that?
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions? Right, should we do demo?
Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you. All right. Many of you have probably seen a lot of these, and especially this morning with Nikhil and Tom going through some of the capabilities. What I'm going to do is focus now on some of the supply chain use cases. I'm going to take us back to our journey. So Anna and I are both product managers. We talk about what's our roadmap, what's our journey that we're on. And so starting last year, this is what got us the most excited. We talked about this human interface of being able to ask questions. And for me, as someone who's been in supply chain for 20 years, I've run these, the number of links to my Tableau dashboards, my Power BI dashboards, all the different custom things that I needed just to answer, this question about inventory, or I had VPs coming in saying, hey, Justin, I need you to be able to answer this now. And you're like, okay, that's gonna take, I'm up all night, grabbing the Excel files, pivoting it out, trying to go get those. What if your data was now there and you could just ask the questions and go get it? And even better, just tell your VP to go ask the question. So, that's where we're going, and that's the power, that's what got me most excited. And so when we looked at last year, just starting with, which suppliers are worst performing. So go through, type, are worst performing, and I'll focus in on North America. So say I'm, a planner, and I want to know, I'm trying to improve my supplier on time and full. And I want to know which suppliers are now, the lowest performing. Well, great. So this is what we came up with. We were able to do these, kind of tabular views with then the links because one, this is pulling in various metrics. So we have the structured data side because we're sitting on top of our applications. We then are pulling in the unstructured side. So maybe you have PDF versions of supplier risk profiles that you've captured, and you want to be able to see what's available now. And so being able to look at those, pull them up, all by asking that question, you now have everything in one spot. You don't have to remember where to go, which SharePoint file or which folder it's in. You can start to say, okay, here is my information. I'm asking questions. Now I'm going to go get the answer. And then what we've always found, or at least I've always found, is that you ask one question, and it's of course going to now ask the next question. And so in this case, say bearing distributors, is, the worst performing supplier. And I want to say, what purchase orders are at risk for bearing distributors right now. And so now I'm sitting this on top of my supply network risk. We've predicted what their purchase orders are going to be, which ones are currently open, which ones are predicted to be delayed, which ones are delayed and already. And then now I have the ability to go, maybe I have a PDF copy of my purchase order. So now I can go open up and see exactly what's in that purchase order. Or it's a link to SAP or Oracle or wherever your MRP system is. Or you can then take this and say, here's that top purchase order. I'm now going to drill in and start to take action right in my supply network risk. And so now I'm into the application. I'm looking at, what's the predicted times, what's going on. And so I was able to very quickly just ask questions and say, essentially, what should I be focusing on now? And then get to, hey, here's now how I'm going to go start taking action and be able to mitigate those risks. All right, so this, if you were here last year, this is where we were at from enterprise search. Now what I'll tell you is it's come a long way. So I'm going to switch personas a little bit, and you saw a lot of this morning. But now I'm going to switch over to more just the unstructured data side and focus a little bit on that just from the capabilities of where we're at with the enterprise search capability, along with then the chat functions and how you can start to drill in and add more information. And so I'm switching over. I'm now, say, a buyer, and I want to be able to understand, who are my suppliers, what are their risks. And so one of the things is I happen to be buying rubber, so who is my largest rubber supplier? So it's going to go through, and I want to pause for a moment and just kind of look at some of what are we seeing. And this is what you saw earlier today, so I'm not showing anything new. But one of the things I like to point out is this came up really quickly. So I will tell you, it's when you're asking new questions, the retrieval is going to take a little bit longer, and you start to see that. But the really cool part is it's got this traceability of it's processing the query, it's searched, it's searching the documents, it's generating an answer, it then switches out to a new generation. So you can see where you're at in the process as it's thinking through. So again, it's not just this blank screen that's circling, it's actually showing you as it's progressing through to be able to do that. And then when we talk about, hey, here's that sources, that full traceability. So I happen to have, the annual reports is where this is coming from. Well, here's the excerpt that, it used as one reference, here's another one. But as you look through these, then you can actually click on these just as Anna was describing, and now here's the quarterly report. So this one happens to be the quarterly report. For a supplier, you can look in here, it's all the same, maybe, anyways. And then the ability to do the thumbs up and thumbs down. So was this helpful, was this not? I'm gonna submit this, go through. Now, next question. I now know the Dow Chemical in this particular example is my highest risk. So now what I wanna do is summarize Dow's latest financial performance. So now I'm gonna switch over. I'm not looking at who's my rubber supplier. I'm now diving into what do I need to know about my supplier in this particular case. So I've got their annual report. I can click on that. I can see where exactly the excerpt is coming up. It's loading the PDF. This is what I get for live demos. But it's now, this happens to be a 168-page document that it's now taking me to that page. And again, you saw that. So this is a really cool capability because you don't have to remember where everything's at. You can do these hunts. You can load this information in, and now it's available for everyone.
And normally it would also highlight the part of the document that you need as well.
Good point. So then, again, using the chat function, so now I'm focusing in, I'm on, in this particular case, the supplier's performance. Now what I want to do is, what are the key business risks? I can't type when I'm in front of everyone that Dow is facing. So I go through, type that out. I probably spelled things wrong. But as you can see, you saw I was processing. Now it's searching the documents. And it's going through the steps. And when you think about it, we all know how to use a chat function, whether it's on our phone or on here. And so do you need to use the search? Can you use chat? And part of this is how much information do you want to be seeing? I'm now still showing my summary of this supplier over on one screen, and now I'm asking questions that are going to get very particular down on the other side. And so to me, it's just that ability to continue to dive deeper and ask the next question and the next question and the next question, which is when you start to see your results in your data, that's the natural process that you're going to take, because you're never going to get all the information you need the first time. And you may not even be asking the right questions, or you're asking a question to tell you where to go focus. And then one of the really cool things that I thought, and I know Nikhil was able to show this earlier, is when I start to look at what has been the trend, is the ability for us to then produce graphs and charts. And so the ability to take this data that's out there, produce those charts, really importantly is then turn those charts into grids, and then you can export those into an Excel file. I mean, that fast to be able to get the information that you're looking for right through asking a question, go get the information, and now you can go use it. Maybe you're sending it off to the supplier, maybe you're having a conversation internally. So the enterprise search capability from last year to then this year has advanced significantly in all the links, in the ability of the thumbs up, thumbs down, the capabilities of the how we're actually producing the graphs and the charts and the exports. It's just a very powerful, along with then all the back-end things that Nikhil was describing with the accuracy and the protection side. So now the question comes, where are we going with this? And so this is where we're taking this and saying, as Anna described, is how do you start to now embed this into the applications to improve our explainability? So when we start to look at explainability, and so this happens to be demand forecasting, is demand forecasting, you would go through, and so this was the demand forecast subject. So I'm looking at, what's the accuracy, how has it performed, I can see the forecast, the consensus, I can see it, I can see all the features, but this is a lot of information to consume. So now you can drop in this new little modal right in the middle that says, hey, let's let the generative AI capability now summarize what you should be paying attention to. And so the forecast has dropped. So now it's describing the forecast and the change for you. Yes, you can see that in a KPI tile and in a metric, and you can see that in the raw data, but to be able to have it just read out 1 to 2 sentences to describe what's happening, it makes your analysts and your planners more efficient as you're doing this. And then the question comes is, okay, I'm looking at my forecast, lags for this welder. Well, what's driving my forecast? And now you can have the pre-established questions that would come out, and we can learn, what are those questions you're asking? Or you could have gone right into the chat function and be able to ask those. And so what it'll do now is start to summarize, hey, here's my forecast for this welder. Here's now the major drivers, and puts it into a bullet form. You can now copy and paste that out, send it in an email to whoever. You can add, the chat capability, or, ask the next question. First, again, you can add in the thumbs up, thumbs down, submit this, give that feedback. Highly encourage giving feedback back to the model so they can continue to learn for it. But then you want to learn, hey, what's the next thing? How is this different from my consensus forecast? And so, again, we've had the enterprise search. It was its own thing, kind of to answer questions and lead you to where that information's at. But now think of that capability as now embedded into your applications, where now you can ask those questions. And yeah, the data is all there, the evidence package is all there, but this is that next layer of ability to now get that explainability and truly understand what is the AI model telling you. So now you can trust it and move to kind of that, hey, how do I trust this and take action, whether it's a demand forecast where I'm going to accept it, whether it's an inventory recommendation, I'm going to accept that or reject it. The idea is we want to get the users comfortable with the AI recommendations as much as possible to move forward. All right, I will jump back to Q&A. What questions do you have? Doug?
So bringing in when I think of data to train the model on, right? There's the data that our company controls, our ERP data, our internal emails, things like that. We can pull structured and unstructured data and say this is the domain that we want to train the model on. For supply chain, obviously, the next big frontier is how do you bring in other data, external data, whether it's industry trends, whether it's financial reports and things like that. And I assume you have the ability to start doing that as well, correct?
Yeah, and so I want to separate this question as a couple different dimensions to it. When you sit on top of the applications, the structured data comes in through our data model, and we've already labeled everything. We've already trained it on what to go do, so it becomes very easy. And our data model has pretty much end-to-end from suppliers all the way out to customers what you're going to need. And so that comes naturally with it. Now, even some of our like demand forecasting and our supply network risk, part of the data model are those external events that come into this. And so we can bring those in very quickly and use it to train. And then the unstructured side from documents to be able to add those in as another source as well.
So we already use external data. For demand forecasting as an example, we may be using data sources like macroeconomic data, futures, commodities futures, right? Stock market, weather. I mean, really anything that either we provide to our customers for free or you guys may already have as part of your subscriptions that we can use. So when we think about data sets that we use, it's actually kind of 3 types of data sets. One is your classic, let's say for demand forecasting, it's your classic ERP. So this is where your orders live, maybe shipments information. You may have other sources of data in your system that we also bring in. Once again, for demand forecasting, it would be something like promotions, marketing campaigns. It doesn't apply to all businesses out there, but it's relevant for many. And the third one would be this external data that we bring in. In fact, the reason we do it is because we do find that it's it usually helps increase the accuracy of our forecasts. So this is actually kind of a core tenet in our philosophy of AI. Using external data always happens, and it's something that is extremely common for us. So in the use case that Justin did in the last demo, some of the data sources were those external data sources already. Go ahead.
Is the generative part going to become standard functionality for the app eventually?
Yeah, we're working on that with some of our customers, some of whom might be familiar to you. So that is the roadmap. We're very honestly, right now we're trying to figure out what the sweet spot for usability is. We're not in the business of creating gimmicky products. I don't want to throw in generative AI just so we have generative AI and so we can say we have generative AI. So we're testing things with our customers. The knowledge assistant use case has proven value for many customers. We have deployed it many, many times, and we'll continue deploying it. For specific applications, we're testing different things with different customers, and whatever works and really has that high ROI, that's going to end up in the base product.
Yep.
But for certain problems, generative AI sounds like the best way to go. For example, we're now being asked for what's our risk assessment of our supply chain going through the Red Sea. That's something I either have to have somebody go out and really do a lot of research and understanding, or if I had the right data sets, could be done.
Yeah, and something to understand here is that you still need to have an underlying AI that can do some of that analysis, right? So you start with the data sets, internal data, external data. So Red Sea, okay, so maybe there's some pirate attacks, weather events, I don't know, Suez Canal is blocked again, something else is happening. And then the generative AI would be the intelligence layer on top of that. And we actually have a supply network risk product that Justin owns. And yes, it's a great use case to sit on top of this and make it easier to interact, but you still need a solution first that will create query all the data, bring it together, and then create the answers.
And I'll tell you, the definition of what risk means is different for different situations. So are you predicting when a purchase order is going to be late is a risk? Are you predicting when you're going to fulfill? Are you asking it to tell me, is there more risk in the Red Sea today than there was last month? That's a different question, and it's still using the same risk. And this is actually something that our defense partners are also working on too with their contested logistics. And so we're working very closely with them on bringing some of those capabilities over to the supply chain side. But again, to answer your question, it's going to be a different information sources to then go summarize what risk means.
And the value of generative AI is that you can actually train the model for each customer to kind of identify what those definitions are. So, not sure what business you are in, but maybe for you it's a pirate attack that's a problem, right? Or, well, I guess that's a problem for everyone, actually.
It is. Yeah.
Okay, but let's say it's a delayed shipment that's more of a problem for you than for somebody else because you are paying a much higher fine if your OTIF is really bad. For somebody else, it may be something else, but we actually work with the customers to identify, it's basically called prompt engineering, right? So how does AI parse that question so that it understands exactly what your intent is? Go ahead.
Right, that's my question. With regard to the hallucination, so how do C3 make sure that the answers you're going to give to the customers is hallucination-free? So, and my second question is, if that is just the extraction from the sources that provided, I mean the C3 is taking answers from, and the source is incorrect, then you're going to take that, whatever that portion of that source, then obviously the answer is going to be incorrect. Or is there any other validation process that you're going to make sure that your answer is indeed a correct answer?
This is a very interesting question. The first part I think is easier to answer than the second. We use something called Retrieval Augmentation Framework, or RAG. If you go to any other generative AI sessions, you'll probably hear quite a lot about this. Essentially what it does is, the main principle behind it is that we only allow generative AI to answer the questions that we know we have the answers for. There's a lot of work that goes into that, but the main principle is that you set that safeguard so it doesn't get to be creative and make things up. Then there's kind of not the safeguard of linking to data sources, right? So that also really helps to verify that the answer is correct. Now, your question is essentially garbage in, garbage out, right? So if the data source is wrong, will the answer be wrong? Yes, there are, depending on the use case, there are ways to go around it. So you can actually have generative AI point out that there's conflicting sources of information. So for instance, you have a use case where your salesperson is entering into CRM, this customer said they want to buy 1,000 units of something. And then now this salesperson kind of at the similar time says, actually this customer is having cost cuts, they're not buying anything. So you want generative AI to point that out and kind of cite both. And we do that. Once again, it comes to prompt engineering, so we'll have to know your use case specifically to know that we have to watch out for this. But it's a very solvable problem, and also actually a very interesting one. So thank you for that question.
I'll add on to that. So one of the methodologies that I've always applied is, and the mentalities is that sunshine is the best disinfectant. So think about what that means. As you expose bad data, you then get it fixed. And so one of the things that you can quickly do is maybe there is some multiple sources that can vouch for each other, but oftentimes it's someone has fat-fingered a purchase order and the wrong price on. I know that never happens to any of your companies. And so you don't want to accidentally have that go through. Usually there's auditing process that'll catch those, but as those recommendations come back, you're gonna get it highlighted, and that's gonna expose that bad information faster before it goes too far. And so a lot of our machine learning, whether it's in sourcing optimization, or you see the things in demand forecasting or in inventory options, they're now going to highlight and emphasize some of those data problems and the data gaps, and then in the evidence package, they're going to call them out. So now you can go fix
So
it.
one question about the cost, right? So all this language model, I think some of the earlier session we have also mentioned it's not free. It's not free in terms of energy, but it's also not free in terms of the cost. So
the compute, yeah.
Remember, it's 1 cent per 1,000 tokens something. So it accumulates. In the use cases you guys have seen, have you ever compared or has any analysis in terms of the run cost compared to the benefit or the additional impact it brings?
Also a very interesting question.
I have not. And actually what I would direct you to is go talk to the Gen AI team. So they're the ones who have the really deep answers and they're paying attention to it more. We're more focused on how do we take their cool technology and apply it to supply chains at this point. And so, but that is a very valid question to ask, because from a cost standpoint, it is going to add runtime. Yeah. I don't know how much more.
And we do track runtime, so we have some idea of which queries are more expensive. But that's, kind of goes back to my earlier point where we are building things with customers right now. And before we decide what's going to be permanently in base, we're making sure that that ROI is there, right? Simply put, if something is just saving your analyst a couple hours of time per week, it's probably not the best ROI, right? I mean, your analyst is going to be happy, but financially, it's really not there. But if this is something they can highlight that, hey, your shipment in the Red Sea is about to experience a huge risk factor and can actually save you millions of dollars, that's a very different example. So the ROI will be different for each customer. And I would say that before we look at individual queries, I think the bigger case is which is the use case does it have the ROI before we kind of break it down, query by query.
All right, I know we're over.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you
Great
so
questions.
much for your time.
So, thank you.